Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Jr., Professor of Africana Studies at the City University of New York, whose African stool name was made a chief in Africa, and that stool name is Nana Kwekujura Ajiman II of the Agogo stool in Asante, Ghana. We are glad to have you join us in the first in a series, part one of this enormous series on the African scholar warriors and the intellectual warfare that they have been engaged in and the victories that they have won and the victories that have to be continued to be won for us to be able to establish the truth, the scientific truth of African humanity. This series, part one, will deal with my personal involvement in the process that we are calling the African Renaissance, the rebirth of African peoples. And this rebirth of African peoples will allow us to look at our history, past, present, and future, and to be able to find the empowerment we need to continue the great walk of our peoples from the beginning of time through the great eras of civilization to the devastation of the enslavement and colonial period, and now to the rebirth, the rise of the black man with his rock, his woman, his partner, and with their child. And that child is pointing to the future. This great imagery was produced in the last 10 years by an African leader, Maître Abdoulaye Wade, the president of Senegal. And he knew that we needed an image of the struggles we've engaged in and the victories we've won. And so this particular great image is a monument. And it's the monument of the African Renaissance movement. And that movement reflects the history of African peoples coming together to form a union of African states. 30 African nations met at the foot of this monument, and inside of this monument are meeting rooms and exhibition halls. And these leaders met when this monument was dedicated, April the 3rd, 2010, in Dakar, Senegal. And they pledged and had a covenant that they will continue the African struggle and enhance its significance and greatness for all of our people, not only on the African continent, but Africans everywhere, in what we call the diaspora, the dispersions, the distribution of Africans in Europe and in North America, the Caribbean, and South America, as well as Africans in Asia and the islands of the Pacific. So there is a coming together of the African family. And that coming together is a very important historical moment for our peoples. And so we want to be able to talk about the role that I've been able to play in that process, and also those partners of mine that have been involved. And that includes my wonderful wife, Dr. Jeffries, who was a pioneer in going to Africa in 1960 with the Operation Crossroads Africa program. That includes those who were our mentors, the Dr. John Henry Clarks, the Dr. Joseph Ben-Jacqueline, who almost single-handedly pointed us to the Nile Valley, and that we had to claim a victory in the Nile in order to be able to deal with the African Renaissance, including partners such as Professor Ed Scobie, who helped myself and our staff develop the largest Black Studies program in the world. And Professor Scobie is a great African. He will be remembered for his steadfastness and his heart and his love for his people. He was from one of the smallest islands in the Caribbean, but he developed one of the largest African hearts and understanding and appreciation of our people, and one of the most significant African minds. He was involved in the process of freeing your African mind, along with the others who are part of our community, Professor James Smalls was of the younger generation, and they began to protest and revolt and help the older generations form a bond with them that have produced these great revolutionary successes that we've had in transforming Africans from a part of humanity that was not even considered human and was considered property just less than 200 years ago. And even with the founding of this nation, this consciousness of us being property and this concept of us being property and the legal status of us being property was built into the constitutional framework of America. So within the period of the system of white supremacy cementing itself everywhere in the world, there's been a movement among our people to establish our humanity and the dignity of African peoples with a sacred destination and a sacred mission to accomplish this. And so there were not only the scholar warriors, but also great black women who made a contribution in this process. And so we will be also referring to them and the work that they had to contribute, that they contributed to this process. It's been a family affair. The African Renaissance, the rebirth of African peoples, the rise of African peoples, from the devastation of enslavement, the dehumanization of enslavement, from the degradation of colonialism and imperialism. This great rise will leave a future for our young. But they have to be a part of this growing consciousness. They can't be separated and consider themselves a generation in and of themselves. They're a continuity of this African greatness. And so when you have this great image, which was created on a hill in Senegal, it was purposely designed to be larger than the Statue of Liberty, which represents a serious period of American history. And even that Statue of Liberty has an African foundation, which I will explain in the materials we're going to be presenting. But this statue is also larger. This image, this collection of the rise of the African family is larger than Rio, the statue of Jesus, the Redeemer, overlooking Rio. And the beauty of it is that it's not the acknowledgement or dedicated to one man. It's not a war memorial. It's not a religious icon. It is a representation of the rise of the chosen people, the first to move around the earth, the first to build high cultures and civilizations, the first to share that with other peoples on the earth. And so this is an enormous representation of what our struggles have been all about. And to have the young child pointing not to Europe, where we have been trained to look for sustenance, but pointing not east to the new rise of Asian peoples, or even to Mecca, and not pointing south to the rest of the continent. That young child is pointing west to the Western Hemisphere, where North America, the United States, the Caribbean, and South America have strategic, critical masses of African peoples. And it is this relationship between the Africans out of Africa, their skills, their training, their wealth, their passion, their consciousness, linked to the African continent, which will produce various stages of the African Renaissance in the future. So I'm very optimistic about what we've done, because I understand, as Frederick Douglass said years ago in the struggle against slavery, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. And those who profess the faith of freedom are men who want the crops without plowing up the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and lightning. And this struggle must be a moral one or a political one. because power concedes nothing without a demand. These were the sentiments expressed by a brother who fought out of slavery, like the Harriet Tubmans of the world, to establish African humanity. And the explosion of information over the last 100 years, since the devastation and defeat of slavery, has been to raise Africans to their true place in humanity as the chosen ones, the mother and fathers of humanity, as my wife would say. This has been the initiation of an important series of understanding the true history of black folk and their struggle and their relationship to other parts of the human family. This work will be expansive and will be multidimensional. It will be available for you by contacting those who have produced and directed this work.